as they're talking, or will that just happen naturally?
So Zoom will automatically go to people as they speak. So no, you don't have to do anything technical. Okay, great. Okay, so it's just after 7 now. Or will that just happen naturally? So Zoom will automatically go to people as they speak. So no, so let me, you don't have to do anything technical. Okay, great. So we're obviously getting an echo there. So it's just after 7 now. Or will that just happen naturally? Zoom will automatically go to people as they speak. So let me, you don't have to do anything technical. Okay, great. So we're obviously getting it. Right. Okay. Well, I will start inviting people in and say my introduction to you all. Thank you so much, and have fun. I suspect we'll be done by about 8:05 or so. If you wouldn't mind, just you could cut your cameras actually until Martha is introduced. That would be great. You're able to, doesn't if you can't, it doesn't. He's still not hearing anything. Okay. So I'd like to welcome you to this event arranged tonight by the John Schofield Trust, and I hope that many of you are joining us for the first time. If you are, and you've come along to pick up some hints as to how to apply to our mentoring scheme application round, which is currently open, then you've come to the right place, and you'll also find on our YouTube channel a very helpful webinar which we recorded a few weeks ago on the best way to tackle our application form. And if you are not considering doing that, but you do know any other journalists who might be interested, please do pass our details on to them. The application round remains open until the end of September. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our host tonight, Martha Kellner, but if I can press the buttons correctly, I want to share my screen with you, because one of the things that it's useful to know about the Trust is that all of our guests for our masterclasses give their time for free, and the Trust tries to run all its events without charging. But if you are in a position to make any donation, small or large, to the Trust, then on your screen at the moment, I hope, is a QR code which will allow you to snap it with your phone and make a small donation. Whether it's £5 or £10, anything you can afford, would be extremely welcome to us as we continue to do our work to encourage the next generation of young journalists and to help to diversify the newsrooms of the UK. But I'm going to introduce you now. I'm going to stop sharing that screen. I'm going to introduce you now to Martha Kellner, who is our host for this evening, who will introduce our guests for this fantastic masterclass on how to present a news programme. Thanks very much, Martha.
Thank you very much, David. Yeah, I'm the US correspondent for Sky News, coming to you from Austin, Texas, where I'm reporting on the US's ever restrictive laws on abortion, but very, very excited to be hosting this masterclass on presenting. We've got an absolutely outstanding panel of speakers. They don't actually require much introduction. They're three women at the very, very top of their game. But just to give you a reminder of who they are and their careers. First up, we've got Kathy Newman, one of the main presenters of Channel 4 News, now also a presenter on Times Radio. She joined Channel 4 News in 2006 and was the first female main presenter of the programme. During her time at Channel 4 News, she's broadcast a string of incredibly important scoops. They include an investigation into the British sex offender Simon Harris, which saw him jailed for 17 years. Previously to working in television, Cathy spent over a decade working in Fleet Street, latterly with the Financial Times. She's also written 2 outstanding books, the first of which, Bloody Brilliant Women, is about female pioneers in 20th century Britain. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Cathy.
Thanks, Martha. Great to be here.
Thank you. And second up, we have Julie Etchingham. Again, not much introduction required. She's the multi-award winning ITV news presenter, famous for her relaxed and accessible style while presenting some of the most important TV news bulletins. She's presented from around the world, from the inauguration of President Obama to the Asian tsunami and the Japanese earthquake. At home, she marshals very effectively general election leaders' debates for ITV. She's also twice been named the Royal Television Society's Presenter of the Year, first in 2010, then in 2016. I'm sure she'll give us more details on this, but Julie began her career while still at university before becoming one of the BBC's trainee reporters. So thank you as well, Julie, for joining us.
Pleasure. Great to be with you. Great to be with such bloody brilliant women.
And last but by no means least, we're also hoping to be joined by Naga Munchetti. She's currently racing.
Got me.
We've got Naga.
Currently driving into Manchester in traffic. I apologise.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much for making the effort and racing up the motorway to get to us. Naga, of course, one of the most familiar faces on BBC TV and now one of the most familiar voices on BBC Radio. She's grilled countless political heavyweights from Hillary Clinton, David Cameron and Tony Blair. Also a master of the lighter side of TV and radio, with celebrity interviews ranging from Mick Jagger to Benedict Cumberbatch. Naga began her career in newspapers for the City Pages at the Evening Standard and the Observer, and her first job in TV was at Reuters Financial Television. She's also one of my favourite ever Strictly Come Dancing contestants. So thank you very much for joining us, Naga.
Martha, you need to watch more of Strictly.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Stand by that. So I guess it makes sense, first of all, to start off with whether presenting for each of you was your aim when you got into journalism, if it was something you naturally gravitated towards, and a bit of your route of how you got started. So I guess start with you, Cathy, if you don't mind on that question.
Yeah, sure. No, presenting absolutely wasn't in my game plan. I didn't really have a game plan, to be honest. I started off on newspapers, as you said, and I started off actually on a local newspaper called the North Devon Journal. I got a scoop about goats, wild goats being culled and on a cliff top path, and the police had launched a manhunt because they thought it was a murder, and it turned out that the council had slain all these wild goats without telling anyone. So that was my first scoop. So I was very much driven by reporting, and having done the local newspaper, I then reported. I was told that the way into journalism was to specialise. So I went on to Media Week, which no longer exists anymore. From there, I went to be media business correspondent on the Independent, which only exists online. So I seem to have a knack of joining organisations that then cease to exist. Let's hope Channel 4 is in existence for a very long time. So I after the Independent, I jumped from there to the Financial Times, and I was there for about 8 years. So that was kind of, I suppose, my most solid grounding in journalism, and it was very much, it's very much driven by reporting in a very detailed, forensic way on stories. And I did lots of investigations there, which was great fun and sort of got me into that side of journalism. I think, just to backtrack, why did I want to be a journalist? I didn't have a telly when I was growing up. until I was about 16. And then I saw Kate Adie standing up in a flak jacket reporting on the first Gulf War. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I'd never seen a woman on television doing something as exciting as that. So I wanted to be a war reporter, and that's, you know, I've never quite made it on that front. So maybe that's my next job. So after the Financial Times, I did sort of bits of punditry on TV, and then got hired by Channel 4 as political correspondent, and I'm still here now, but as a presenter. So absolutely had not the slightest idea that I would end up presenting the nightly news when I first set out in journalism. And I think very much the base, the sort of bedrock of everything I do is about journalism, and it's about reporting. So I see myself very much in that vein. Hope that answers your question.
It does. It's interesting that you say sort of journalism first, and that's the basis also for being a good presenter. Would you agree with that, Julie? I know you started obviously on the BBC trainee reporter scheme.
Yes, that's right. And I'd wholeheartedly agree with that. And whenever, you know, if people are, you know, interested enough to ask, you know, if they want to get into news presentation, I said, well, you know, just shelve that. You either want to be a journalist or you don't. And I sort of knew that I wanted to be a journalist from quite a young age. I'd kept a diary from the age of 6, and the older I got, the more it became a little slightly sado cuttings file with little bits of news paper stuffed in it, you know. I wasn't from a journalist background. My parents are both teachers, and it was my mum actually who said, you know, and I can even remember when she said it, you know, maybe you ought to think about being a journalist. It was one of those little light bulb moments as a child. And so I just sort of, you know, I started out, you know, picked up the phone, went and worked at my local radio station. You know, I was an absolute, you know, classic dog's body in the newsroom, you know, making coffee, looking after people, then eventually getting to have a go at it. And I kept that going through university as well, and then applied for one of the BBC's journalist training schemes. And back then, they were bi-media, so you got trained in radio and TV. And I was really fortunate to be picked as Birmingham's trainee. So I was immediately on this incredible news patch, you know, sort of the very early 90s. There's a lot going on there. And it was a very busy television newsroom. So I really cut my teeth as a sub. You know, I was writing bulletins. Sometimes I might go out and do an interview for somebody else's package. Then I, you know, bit by bit, I was trusted to do a bit more. And then my boss sent me to Radio Shropshire, which really teaches you how to dig up a story. You know, if you're in a rural, reasonably quiet spot, you know, there's nothing that sort of trains you better than to go to a place where the stories aren't, you know, falling into your lap like they were in Birmingham. So I had a spell in that too. And then sort of went to Newsround. It was one of those jobs that I'd never thought I'd ever apply for, but I was 24 and I thought, actually, I'd never thought about that, but actually, you know, it's got great heritage, that programme. They still cover all the big stories. There was a great advantage in learning to sort of unpack complicated stories for kids, because actually most of the time that sort of simplicity of writing for television news is essential, you know, when we do our jobs day to day now. So I always started out with a mixture of reporting and slowly started to do a little bit of presenting in the mix. And by and large, I've been very fortunate to keep that going all the way through my career. I went to BBC Breakfast News. I was their sat van reporter, sort of embarrassing myself in various locations up and down the country at stupid hours of the morning. And then I started presenting a bit of breakfast news. And then Nick Pollard poached me to go to Sky News. And one of the things I will say about presenting, and, you know, it is just a sort of fact of life, you know, that came at a time in my life when I started my family, and it just meant my hours were much more regular and much more predictable, which helped a lot. But what I really loved about working at Sky was that, you know, if there was a really big breaking story, you'd be chucked out on the road anyway. So you'd be out there working as a reporter and having that good mix. And by and large, just sort of fast forwarding through my career, I've always managed to keep that balance. You know, like Kathy, I still report now. I still dig around for my own stories and set my own stuff up. And the presenting has always been a bit of a sort of icing on the cake, if you like. You're very privileged to do that job, but you know, I couldn't do that comfortably unless I was reporting and doing the journalism. Basically, that's the, you know, base camp what I do in the same way as Kathy. We've come at it from slightly different angles, but I think we're basically saying the same sort of thing.
Yeah, and lots of great TV careers have been launched by Newsround and the grounding issue as well. Nagra, I'm hoping that you can hear us.
I'm hearing everything, don't you worry. And I'm probably not going to say much that's different to Julie and Kathy, except that I came in from a different route. So I had no idea about what I wanted to do when I was younger. Didn't have a clue. I studied English at uni because it was the only thing I thought I would be able to do for 3 years without being distracted. While I was at Leeds Uni, I got involved with the student paper just because I was curious and nosy, and I thought it looked like fun. And it was, and it satisfied my generally nosy, curious, and quite dogged nature. And I then didn't want to get a job. And so I then applied with experience. I'd been doing some work experience at the Observer, Sunday Times, at the Times, for a postgrad, because I didn't want to go out and get a job. And so I got a very coveted place at City University, postgrad in newspaper journalism, which I kind of loved and I kind of hated. But it taught me it taught me discipline, and it taught me the joy of finding your own stories. Those off diary moments, I don't know if anyone does those, where you're just literally sent out to go find a story, you're given nothing, and you just go and find a story. I hated it the first time I did it, and then loved it ever since. And so, you know, like Julie, like Kathy, I have immense joy in finding the story. But from then, and I specialised, like Kathy specialised, I specialised in financial news and economics and not personal finance, but financial news. And because I enjoyed it, and I knew we needed a specialism, and also no one wanted to do it. Everyone hates numbers and everyone hates economics, and no one really then, when I was doing it, kind of saw the excitement in reporting something that was often so complicated. And for me, the joy was always not simplifying, but making a story accessible and interesting and telling someone, and I still stand by that now, whatever the story, why should someone know about it? And how do I make it as interesting as possible? I think Julie was being very polite when she said if someone says they want to be a news presenter, be a journalist, or don't do it. I can't stand it when someone says, I want to be just like you and be a presenter. I'm not a bloody presenter, I'm a journalist. And if you want to be a presenter, go and do adverts or something. Just be a face on telly, you know, saying stuff that doesn't mean anything to you. To be a presenter was never my ambition, but I went up the route. I went to CNBC Europe, and I started as a producer and worked my way up as an exec producer, and then very fortunately got poached to various jobs, went to Channel 4 News, started reporting, got poached by Bloomberg, went back to my love of financial news, markets, and then got poached by the BBC as a presenter. But for me, the only reason I kind of started gravitating towards presenting was because I'm a control freak, and I didn't like the fact that the presenters I was producing for weren't doing the interviews as well as I thought I could do them. And so that's why I did it. And when I present, I love the fact that I get to interpret the story, but I also have always kind of been very collaborative, and make sure that the producers I do work with talk to me and tell me how they interpret stories or interviews or reports being told. Because one of the things I do believe as a presenter is that, you know, I do think we're kind of the icing on the cake, because we have a whole load of substance beneath us and research that has been done by teams as well as by us. And that's what as a presenter we do, but equally I do get an immense joy in having my own story and telling them my way.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Nagra. And I think you touch on there, which is something that I think all three of you agree on and have a consensus on, which is that journalism is at the heart of being a successful news presenter, and it's about stories and the people who you're telling those stories to, as opposed to just wanting to be a presenter. I should say at this juncture that if anyone wants to ask any questions, please note them in the chat box below, and I'll try to get to those questions as well. But I think just pulling on that thread, I think being a presenter is often seen as the most glamorous role in the newsroom. Can you, is that accurate? And I guess, what is the skill set that's needed to be a successful news presenter, do you think? Again, I'll start with you, Kathy, again.
I liked Julie's wicked laugh. By the way, I'm muting myself when I'm not speaking because my agent just texted me and said there was a lot of background noise because I'm actually in the newsroom now and the news is on, so I should be in the studio, but I'm delighted to be here instead. Yeah, the glamour. I think it's glamorous being an ITV presenter. I think that's right. I think Julie can tell you about the glamour of that. I mean, I think Naga hit the nail on the head there when she was saying that there's this whole, the icing on the cake, and you've got this amazing team behind you, which is absolutely true. And that's, it's a great weight of responsibility that you don't want to let down all these correspondents who've brought in amazing stories. And, maybe you're doing an interview on a key sort of legally contentious story and you don't want to screw it up. So, that's very important. Skill set for the job. I think one thing you highlighted in your intro to Julie, which I think she does amazingly, is that ability to be very calm and authoritative when it's a very stressful situation, like in an election debate. I'm sure Julie will tell you all about that. But yeah, absolutely the swan thing of you can be paddling very hard below the water, but what people see is that it's very calm. I remember once my first boss at Channel 4, Jim, said to me, you don't want the audience to feel either embarrassed or sort of stressed watching you. And so that always stuck with me, that if everything is going to hell in a handcart, I remember once nothing was working in the studio, the cameras weren't working, the auto cue wasn't working, and I was really new to the whole gig of presenting. And I remember I obviously forgot that I had all my scripts printed out, and I just forgot that I had the get out of jail free card of just being able to pick them up and just, read a few things out and don't stop talking. And so I kind of kept looking around the studio to find a camera that was working, and nothing was. And that 10 seconds of live TV felt like an eternity. So obviously now that would never happen to me now. No, never in a million years. But yeah, so another really important skill, if everything goes wrong, you've got to stay calm and just bear in mind that, you have facts and information at your disposal. I've always got a ream of scripts and info in the studio with me because I like to be prepared, because the best way to avert disaster is to have a plan B. So I like to have a plan B in the studio. And then the other thing I'd say in terms of skill set for a presenter is just to be yourself as much as possible on air, because you don't want to be a kind of parody version of yourself. Yeah, it's slightly heightened being in a studio. You're a slightly sort of maybe more animated or, more engaged version of yourself. But I think to be yourself, and that's more relatable for people who are watching, if they kind of see you and go, oh, she's a normal human being, rather than the glamorous vision that perhaps people might traditionally associate with a TV presenter, that, obviously look smart, do your makeup, wear the right clothes, but being a real person and being yourself, I think, is really important.
That's brilliant.
Sorry, one other thing that I should have said. I mean, this is all sort of tumbled out in no particular order, as would never happen in a live bulletin. But obviously, to be incredibly well prepared so every interview I do, I prepare and over prepare, because you never know when you might need to, someone might die and the program goes open ended. Then you've got to know what you're talking about. So yeah, be absolutely rigorous and think of every sort of different scenario for a complicated, high pressure interview.
Julie, can I just get you to pick up on that, and that idea of, I know you mentioned before about doing your own research, having your own sources, having your own ideas on stories. Can you just explain a little bit about how that plays into your role on screen?
Yes, I mean to echo what Kathy said, is you shouldn't go into a studio unless you are completely prepared, if necessary, to keep that program on air if literally everything else falls down around you. So you need to know you need to know enough detail about every story on your program so that if something, if a package cuts out in the middle, you know where the thread of that story is, and you can make sense of it and take your audience with you as you navigate that bit of the program. But it is really not a case of just simply reading out a link and waiting for a VT to run and then doing that. It's absolutely not. You're there. You are there to share the news of the day with your viewer and do that in a personable way, but also you are there really to mop things up when stuff goes wrong, and I suppose you have to be able to edit quickly in your head. For example, if suddenly you realize, okay, that's gone wrong, I've got 40 seconds to fill there, what facts do I corral in some sort of reasonable order that makes sense for an audience, and use that time productively. So you're constantly sort of shifting, and I'm sure Naga and Kathy do this as well, but whilst I'm on air, I've got I've got the running order in front of me in a computer in the desk. I'm endlessly rewriting things on air as we go. Quite often we have a top line message system with our chief writer and the program editor in the gallery, and we are quite often tinkering with things whilst we're on air, sharpening them up, just rephrasing things, or if something's broken late, making sure that we get things in quickly and accurately. So you are there, I mean, sometimes almost as a reporter at a desk, if you like. You've got to have those sort of editing skills to hand as well. But I mean, I suppose it's worth just dwelling for a moment on the fact that, we, all three of us, don't just do news bulletins. We're in situations where quite often you're doing different types of programs as well. I've been very fortunate to do, things like the royal wedding, or, I worked on the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral earlier this year, and you're on air for hours. And, the preparation that goes into programs like that, not just from my perspective, but for the whole team, in terms of the really deep dive, detailed work that you have to do in terms of just the facts, being able to help your audience navigate what they see unfolding in front of them, getting the tone right, making sure you are absolutely across every detail of that story. I mean, that is proper do your homework stuff. There's no way around it. You see about 1/10 of what this job is when you see us on air presenting. The rest of it is, get your head down and get your head around the facts and keep going over them. And really, it's sort of deep dive work. I mean, I absolutely love that side of the job. And although I find, those big events incredibly nerve-wracking, and the adrenaline never leaves you, the element of it I really, really love is the sort of detailed work, and that's why, it's a great job, really, because you get to do that sort of solitary prep work, but then you also get, the great privilege of sort of taking people through key national and international events.
Naga, I don't know whether you want to pick up on any of what Julian and Kathy were saying, but also another question that's come in from Shoma, who's tuning in. She says, how has social media changed your job? And I guess tangentially to that, we've also got a question from Patrick about, does reporting on so many tough issues take a toll, and how do you stay resilient? And I guess something that brings them together is that social media then gives people a platform sometimes to engage and to praise what you're doing, but also to criticise what you're doing. And do you think it increasingly takes a toll on your mental health, reporting some of these issues and being open to that sort of criticism?
Do you want me to move on to social media, Martha, or what would you prefer?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just reflecting on the social media question.
Yeah, because I completely echo what Kathy and Julie said. I had that thing this morning where our open media system, that various systems are used, completely crashed while we were on air. So we had no scripts, and on radio, it's all done kind of on the fly. So absolutely, just to reiterate, always know your stuff. Always know that you know the stories, you're able to tell it. kind of goes, I suppose, on, sorry, I'm just walking into my flat now. It kind of, with social media, people are going to hate. And unfortunately, social media, which is a brilliant tool, Twitter, for example, is a brilliant tool in terms of journalism and to find people and keep across what people are speaking about. But social media, what were the first questions, Martha?
The first questions, well, it was just how has social media changed your job? And I guess you sort of answer that with the access to sources. And
access, fantastic. Sources, fantastic. Hearing conversations that you may not be privy to, or kind of seeing how conversations are working out, brilliant.
And then the other question was, how does reporting on tough issues take a toll on you mentally? And something I was asking tangentially to that is whether abuse perhaps on social media, which most people in the public eye experience on a fairly regular basis, if that has an effect on your mental health and perhaps how you're able to deal with that.
Second question was, how does social media impact how I do my job?
That was the first question from Shoma, which you answered. But the second question was, how does perhaps the negative side of social media?
Okay, fine. You learn to have a very thick skin, which I've learned. I can only speak for myself. I think being a woman in the media and on screen means that we receive much more criticism and misogyny, and I'm sure Kathy and Julie will pick up on that. I think you have to, and it kind of goes back to that when I first started, and I probably still have it now, that imposter syndrome, where you think, well, I always just wonder if I am good enough. So I always make sure I'm overly prepared, not overly prepared, just as prepared as I can be. So I know that if someone's going to criticize me and say she didn't know what she was talking about, I know, or if an MP, for example, comes back and says, no, you've got that wrong, I know I haven't. So that's how I think I deal with critics, full stop. If there's nothing to criticize, you can dislike me, of course you can, people, we don't like everyone, but I would like to think that the thing that I'm most proud of, i.e. being accurate and doing my research, isn't something that we criticize. And I have to put things in for myself into boxes about what's reasonable. If you're going to criticize me, is it a reasonable criticism, or are you criticizing something that actually is pointless? Like, you don't like my hair, you don't like my voice, you don't like the way I sat, you don't like the fact that I wasn't deferential enough to a minister. I'm not gonna, I have to, that's how I handle it in order to protect my mental health.
Mm-hmm. Same question to you, Julie and Kathy, and I guess whether women on TV are perhaps held to a higher standard than male colleagues, and whether they receive a lion's share of perhaps the more personal abuse.
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree with what Naga was saying. You have to develop a really thick skin. And actually, the first time that I got like a whole array of death threats and, horrible trolling, it really floored me. And I've kind of never seen anything like it. And I just felt like I felt like I was being torn apart in the street, in public, and sort of eviscerated publicly. It was just really dehumanizing. And that was quite hard to deal with. But I suppose if there's an upside to that, it's that every time something like that happens, I sort of care less. And I think learning not to care is I genuinely don't spend time worrying about it now. I tweet less than I did, which maybe is a shame, but maybe not, because actually I still think the key thing about my job is making contacts and using my contacts and bringing in stories from my contacts. And Twitter is part of that journalistic piece. I agree with what Naga said about, it's good to reach out to sources and to sort of see what's going on and take the pulse of, I think it is a bit of an echo chamber, but you can see what other journalists are reporting on. That's quite useful. But yeah, I just think I've totally changed my approach to social media, and I just don't care what some guy with an egg on his head says about me. I just genuinely don't care. And yes, do women get it tougher? Yes, I think so, definitely. And women of color also. And yeah, and that's awful. And I think the online harms bill, which is currently going through Parliament, you know, not before time. And I think, you know, I have 2 daughters, and I look at what happens to teenagers on social media, and we've had big chats about it. Oh, hi, Naga.
Hi, sorry, I'm back.
She's just appeared. And yet, so I think social media, I think there is a real argument about regulating social media in the same way that broadcasters are regulated. It seems like a no-brainer. The kind of stuff that gets put out online, we'd never get away with. And so I think that will help, but it's going to take a while, and there's going to be lots of battles, and the big tech will no doubt have lots to say about that. So it'll be a while before it becomes a more benign environment, and who knows whether the genie can ever be put back in the bottle.
Julie, I'm sure much of that resonates with you as well. I was wondering whether you're encouraged to keep a presence on social media, and a bit about how it affects you and how you use it or don't use it.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that I would say that it is a whole sort of layer of opportunity and stress that we didn't have. I mean, I've been a journalist for 30 years now, and it is something that, you know, is so recent, you know, that we now have to take on board and accommodate as part of our working lives, you know. And I just think it's for those of us who've been around for a while, it's been quite a hard thing to adapt to. It obviously has its brilliant uses. I'm the first one on it to check for breaking stories or the latest line or the latest, you know, it's like putting your finger and seeing which way the wind's blowing if you're following a wide enough range of people, that, you know, that is obviously you know, and it is incredibly useful for that. And yes, you do trying to reach out to people for stories, and it, you know, it's sort of just, you know, what we'll work within now. But the bottom line is that I know that, for example, you know, for example, when I'm doing the debates, you just know it's going to be an absolute barrage. You know, it's something you have to now accommodate as part of the job. Is right, okay, how am I going to deal with it this time? And you know, events like that, you know, in all of the, and you know, goodness knows they've been heated enough, haven't they, in the last few years? You know, that it's so high octane around those debates that you just know that Twitter explodes at the slightest reason. So I actually, when I've done the debates, I've got a brilliant, I mean, you know, it's a whole team of fantastic producers that work on that. But, you know, I work with one producer in particular very closely, and actually I just hand it to her, and I just look, somebody's got to keep an eye on it in case there is something that is genuinely dangerous to you in there. But actually I just now don't look at it in those moments when you know that it's going to be vile. And it's not all vile. Some people are kind enough to say nice things, you know, but I sort of spare myself that now. And actually on those big moments where, you know, there's a lot of attention, a lot of heat, you know, I'm very fortunate that, you know, I have a producer that keeps an eye on it for me. But I mean, you know, that's the sign of the times, isn't it? That you have to do that to be able to keep your focus. I'm not very thick-skinned, actually. It does get to you. It gets to me. And I suppose I've become a little better at dealing with it, but I wouldn't say a great deal.
Julie,
I find it really hard.
Julie, I was just going to say, when you were saying it's not all vile, I remember when I did the book Bloody Brilliant Women, someone just tweeted me and said, when I look at you, I see the devil looking back. And then somebody else tweeted, should have gone to Specsavers.
I get so much hate. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, to the point I laugh now. I actually have a rule when I do my 5 Live show, because we get the texts coming in, which is equivalent, and we call for listeners to comment. And I have a rule which I put in the first day when I deputised for Emma Barnett, because I took over from Emma Barnett, again, another bloody brilliant woman. And the producer said, oh, we're getting these nice texts in, oh, do you want to see? And I just said, I have a rule. I don't want to see anything positive that's not related to the programme, and I don't want to see anything negative that's not related to the programme or to the subjects we're discussing. Because I find that although you are absolutely focused and you intend to be absolutely focused, if you are told, oh yeah, you're doing so well, grilling this minister or pushing on this, it can sway you. Intentionally or unintentionally, it can sway you. And if you stick to kind of, what did we intend to do with this interview? What did we intend to do with this story? And you stay focused on that, you ignore the people who are adding frivolous comments and unnecessary comments. And that's just one way I try to protect myself. And very similarly to Julie, if I'm doing a minister interview or when I interviewed Boris Johnson, I didn't look at anything afterwards because I knew our game plan. I always know kind of what I intend to do. And once you start letting your ego either be fluffed or damaged, you change the nature of your job and it becomes about you, and it's never, ever about you. I always see myself in a position of privilege that I am a facilitator to conversations, and I am there to ask the questions that other people don't have the privilege position to be in, that I'm in, that Julie's in, that Kathy's in, that we're all in, to ask questions to people we don't have access to, everyday people don't have access to every day.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to reflect on both the positive and the negative side of social media, and also the pressures of being in the public eye as you all are. I just wondered if we could pivot onto a slightly more positive side of the job, and perhaps what are your greatest moments on air, whether that be the privilege of speaking to people like you say, Naga, who the average member of the public doesn't get to speak to, or whether it's reporting from certain locations, revealing things, scoops that you're particularly proud of. Can we start with you, Naga, if that's okay?
Sure. For me, this is going to sound really awful because it is a privilege to be able to talk to people who are in power or of influence. But the joy of my jobs on 5 Live and on Breakfast is I get to talk to people who are everyday people who have had extraordinary things happen to them. And it could be a World War II veteran in Caen when I was doing the D-Day anniversaries. And I just hear a story that I wouldn't have been privy to and no one else would have been privy to. And when they open up to you, it could be a parent whose young boy, and this still touches me, is sitting on the breakfast sofa, who is dying of cancer, and they are working tirelessly to raise awareness about a certain cancer, or raise money or raise funds to help others, and knowing, and we'd all been told we couldn't mention death in front of this boy because he had a terminal illness. And for people to allow you to touch their lives and help them tell their story of something that is so personal and so precious and often so painful, those are the things that really stick with me, and they are a privilege. And those are the things that I take away that don't always bring joy because of the subject matter, but I'm proud. I am very proud that I am in a position of that privilege, and that people trust us enough to let us help them tell their story. And that for me is the joy of the job.
Definitely. I guess same question to you, Kathy and Julie, about what are your sort of greatest moments on the job?
I mean, similarly to Naga, that sounds like an incredible interview with the boy. There was a guy called Tony Nicholson who was campaigning for the right to die, and he was paralyzed from the neck downwards, and he couldn't speak or feed himself, and he wanted to be able to end his life at a time of his choosing without fear of his wife being prosecuted. And the only way he could do the interview was by blinking at the letters on a board, and she would sort of point to the letters and we'd spell out the letters of every word and form sentences. And obviously you can imagine the interview took forever, but I just felt so privileged to be able to tell his story, and he was so determined to have his voice heard, because he literally couldn't speak any other way. And by the end of the interview, which took hours, we were both in tears because it was just such an emotional experience. So that was an incredible privilege. But also, I've loved, I went to Moscow to interview Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and he's such a kind of wily operator. It was just such fun, sort of gaming the interview and sort of working out where he was going to go with it. It was a real challenge. And then Max Mosley, the former Formula One boss who's now died, we had a scoop about him in this racist leaflet he'd put out years ago in an election campaign. And I remember sort of like confronting him with the leaflet in the middle of the show. And it was a live interview. It was really stressful because I knew he was incredibly litigious. So if I put a foot wrong, you know, it could be curtains for me and for probably for the news as well. So it was very stressful, but it was just, again, incredibly exhilarating doing an interview with him. So that was brilliant. And I loved, you know, I love working with the investigations team on you were talking about Simon Harris, a British paedophile who abused all these Kenyan street boys. And actually, because of the investigation we did, he was jailed for 12 years. And also John Smythe, who was a friend of the Archbishop. He beat these boys and young men in the name of Jesus. And we did an investigation revealing what had happened, you know, decades later. And so that was an incredible privilege to be able to tell their story, which had lain buried for decades. And the people in the church associated with the church knew all about it. They had a report spelling it all out in black and white, and they'd never tried to get justice for these victims, these survivors. So that was an incredible honor too. So I do feel like Naga said, a real privilege to be able to do what we do and to tell the stories of people who otherwise wouldn't get their stories and voices heard.
Thanks, Kathy. Examples there of sort of where journalism can very obviously make such a big difference to people's lives. Julie, is there anything that stands out for you as being sort of a great achievement?
Well, you know, it is a huge privilege of this job that you are there, you know, in that sort of, you know, time-worn phrase, you know, you're there, you get a ringside seat at some of the, you know, great sort of moments in history, really, whether it's big national events or, you know, I was in Rockefeller Plaza in New York the night that Obama was first elected, and then went to Chicago, you know, didn't sleep that night, got on the plane overnight to Chicago where he'd just done his first speech as the new president, you know, and that was obviously just the most extraordinary moment for America. And it was incredible to be caught up in all of that, and working on that as a journalist was amazing. But, you know, I mean, I often think back to the work that, you know, the team did on Newsround, and, you know, I was out at, you know, doing a film with the children of the new South Africa in Soweto in the year that President Mandela was, you know, he was inaugurated, and being in Bosnia at the end of the war and speaking to kids. And it's one of those things that, you know, I mean, I think things are so different now because I think kids engage with social media and are just much more savvy in talking to camera and sharing stories. But, you know, back then in the early 90s, and in the wake of the Bosnian War, and, you know, and I say that being very conscious of the fact that we're here speaking, you know, with the John Schofield Trust, and, you know, reflecting on that deeply as I say it, but just hearing children's voices at the end of the Bosnian War about what they suffered in Mostar, for example. They were absolutely brilliant, articulate, amazing kids. And I went back to Mostar a couple of years ago to catch up with them. We did a piece for the On Assignment strand that ITV makes as well. And I said to them, look, I'd love to go back and see if we could find some of these kids that we interviewed at the end of the war. And we found them, you know, and that is great producers. That's great producers as well, tracking them down. And to go back to Mostar and meet up with you know, these, you know, we'd interviewed two little girls in a music school, and we got shots of them sitting with their legs dangling at the piano playing together. And we found them as grown music teachers all these years on. And sometimes just, you know, having the privilege of seeing a story come full circle and still being able to go back to people and you know, amplify those stories, you know, it's just incredible, you know. So there, you know, I mean, there's some amazing moments. And then, you know, Theresa May tells me what the naughtiest thing she ever did was. Then you get a little moment then that takes on a life of its own, you know. So lots of incredible experiences, really. But, you know, always a great privilege to do it.
It's interesting there, Julie, that you draw upon the whole, really appreciates hearing about all the preparations that go into interviews. But have there been moments when you have been caught off guard, when something has surprised you in the middle of a broadcast, and you don't quite know how to respond to it? Shall I start with you, Naga, on that one?
Yeah, I mean, things surprise us all the time. I mean, Kathy, Julie, we're all familiar with breaking news. And breaking news is sometimes something you are absolutely not expecting. I remember breaking the capture of Saddam Hussein, and it had been rumored and rumored and rumored, and we had no idea in breaking that. And I think with it all is you can only draw on your knowledge, always be curious. So I've just got into Manchester tonight. My alarm's going off at 4:45 in the morning, but I will do a couple of hours of reading, watching news, catching up, just so I have an idea of what's going on in the world still. Obviously, I've been at work today as well, so I kind of feel fairly prepared, and we'll get our briefing notes. When I think you have to remember as a presenter your role, and particularly for breakfast, actually, particularly over the last 18 months, people have used breakfast. Breakfast has done really well because people have wanted stability. They've wanted information and they've wanted stability. And we've done really well in terms of viewership because we became more habitual. Breakfast tends to be a habitual viewing. I mean, it's all bulletins you have in your routine, but more people started turning to breakfast and seeing us as a reassuring presence. And I've always known that we're supposed to be, but whenever anything does happen, breaking news or developing story or scary story, and we've all three of us, I'm sure, have played parts in various reporting roles for the terror attacks that we've experienced in recent years. For me, it's be calm. Only say what we know. Don't be afraid to repeat what we know because it's new to everyone. And reassure the viewer that we're only going to tell you what we know. We're not going to speculate because we're not there. But we will be there to get the most informed voices we can to keep you informed. But it's always calm and reassured. The moment you show that and it's like, I can't remember who said it, often you are swimming like ferociously underwater, your legs are going, but you're keeping that swan-like appearance. So for me, yes, things take me by surprise. Of course they do. But the job is not to show my surprise. The job is to keep informing and in as measured a manner and even-handed a manner as possible. Mm-hmm. Almost sounds as if I'm being cold, but in some ways you have to be.
Yeah. Julie, Kathy, I guess maybe similar thoughts to Naga, but have there been situations, whether in big breaking events or other things unexpected, where you've been caught off guard?
Do you after you, Julie?
Well, no, I mean, it is really just to pick up on some of the areas around breaking news. I mean, when I was at Sky News, obviously that's where rolling news channels really sort of come into their own. And, it's not just being prepared journalistically, it's being prepared in getting your tone right as facts start to come in. And I think that's a really important element. And it really sits alongside what Naga was saying about you just keep calm, keep the tone right. You've got to be really conscious. I was on air when 7/7 happened. And for those of you who remember the early hours of that appalling event, there was so much speculation in the early hours about whether this was some sort of electrical fault, whether there was some sort of power outage. And it was really, it was, we were really really trying to navigate something that it took a while for the facts to start emerging. And I went on air with that story, and we still didn't know that it was a terrorist attack when we went on air. And then bit by bit, we started getting the facts coming through. And that is the moment when you realise that there will be people tuning in to watch what's unfolding who may be thinking, I need to know what is happening because I know that my loved one left the house this morning to go to work on that tube line or whatever. So it is a real, you've got to keep this really sort of analytical head on at the time and take people through the story as you know it, but always be aware that what you're dealing with here is, utter tragedy. So your tone, you've got to watch your tone the whole of the way through it. And we were on air for hours and hours that day, and things it was just this unfolding horror. And you know, I often reflect on that day actually, and just think, you know, for a newsroom to sort of completely re-gear around this enormous story, everything else sort of ceases to matter, and you are just, the whole operation turns its attention to that, and you have to sort of sit in this calm space and navigate it. You know, you know, those are the most testing days by a long way, really. And you know, again, it's a privilege to do that job, but there's a lot of responsibility in those hours, I think.
Yeah, I remember the day Prince Philip died. I was on Times Radio, and I remember when you were talking about tone, Julie, Giles Corran's show was on air, which is all about sort of like cooking, and it's all quite jaunty. So they like instantly got him out the studio, and I had to go in very rapidly. And again, I was very aware with that, you know, you've got to kind of, it wasn't, you know, he was very elderly, obviously it wasn't entirely unexpected, but even so, you've got to sort of be thinking about tone the whole way through. And that was, yeah, not nowhere near like the 9/11 in terms of duration, but I was supposed to be on air for 3 hours and I ended up being on air for about 6, I think. So that was interesting. And the other thing, which actually answers another question that's popped up about, so you were asking about unexpected events. It's a funny story, really. Someone else was asking a question about what happens when people don't answer your questions, like politicians and so on, which is infuriating. But sometimes when people do unexpectedly answer your questions, it's quite discombobulating. So I was doing an interview with George Obama, who, brother of the more famous Barack. I knew he was quite wild, but I kind of wanted to know how wild. So I asked Julie's question, which she put to Theresa May, what's the naughtiest thing you've ever done? He said, really immediately and really rapidly, before I had time to gather my thoughts, he said, oh, armed robbery. And I was like, oh, okay. Didn't quite know where to go with that. So when they do answer the question, it can be even tougher than when they don't.
I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things, actually. When Kathy was about Prince Philip, when that broke, we were all prepared, as most newsrooms are. We do obit, we call them obit rehearsals, and we go through these scenarios because we're so aware of the tone, as Julie was saying. And with Prince Philip, one of the things that we really had to be mindful of was this was happening in a pandemic where so many people had lost family members through extraordinary circumstances. And we had to be really mindful of tone, in the sense that, yes, this was a figurehead of, you know, in Britain, but so many people had lost grandparents and loved ones, and it was a really difficult balancing act. And I'm kind of moving away from the kind of the original question, but it was a really difficult balancing act between, this is very sad for the UK and, you know, the monarchy, but actually other people had been through this, especially when we covered the funeral as well, and there was the whole tone about, look at the Queen, she's sitting on her own. But there had been so many families who'd done that. So we had to be very mindful of that as well. And I just wanted to pick up on what Julie said about 9/11. I was a producer when 9/11 happened. And when 7/7 happened, I was at Channel 4 and I was a producer, and I was sent out to go and get pictures and talk to people. But I remember when Grenfell broke and I was on breakfast, and it started in the night and people were waking up to it. And I remember the thing that took me really, really shocked me is Charlie and I were sitting there, Charlie State, my co-presenter, and with memories of 9/11, we were petrified that we were going to, because you take all these live feeds, all these pictures, these live pictures coming through, and you don't wait for a delay often, you take them as they're coming in from all the news agencies. And we were petrified. We were hearing tales of people who had family members in that building. And both of us, because of our experience, remembered the pictures from 9/11 of people throwing themselves out of the building. Yeah. And we were preparing ourselves for images like that. And that, I think you then have to go back to basics. As Julie said, you know, we're in positions of trust and staying calm, but also thinking, when I was hearing from family members who were worried about that and saying that on air, holding my own emotions in, because we're humans at the end of the day. We have families, you know, there are children and loved ones, and just knowing that someone's experiencing that pain, that is very difficult to kind of be that voice of almost authority and calm when you yourself are human and experiencing this fear as well.
Yeah. I guess it's about holding on to those sort of fundamentals of journalism and being a human being, even in the most sort of stressful of situations. I'm aware we're relatively short on time, so I just want to, it's obviously a key part of the John Schofield Trust is promoting diversity in newsrooms. I know you each have been champions of diversity in newsrooms in different ways. I wondered whether you feel the situation is improving, has improved, how far we've got to go in terms of diversity in different roles. I don't know who wants to pick up first.
I mean, I'm happy to pick up on that I think it was last month, anyway, not long ago, Channel 4's Black to Front initiative I thought was really amazing. I'd be interested to know what Naga thought of it. But
I thought it was excellent. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was, sorry, Kathy, I interrupted. I thought it was absolutely brave, brilliant. It's been said before, it's something that should have been done a long time ago, and Channel 4 is pivotal in bringing, in just saying, and excuse my language, screw this, we're going to show you how this looks, how this should look, we're going to do what we need to do. And Channel 4's been great. I thought it was brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I mean, what I thought was amazing as well was that all of the people who fronted our show that night were drawn from within the newsroom. And I thought that was excellent, you know, that we didn't have to sort of hire in new people. The diversity is there, but I still think there's a lot to be improved on. And I think the key area is now actually probably class, really. And that is that diversity of background that I think we all need to work on. You know, it's still too sort of monothematic in terms of people's backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds in particular. But I think otherwise, I think strides have been made and we can't stop now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say at ITV News 2 for sure. I had a bit of a Wi-Fi freeze there, so I didn't quite catch what Kathy was saying. But for those, I mean, we take it really seriously. We don't get it right all the time, but we have an audit of every single one of our programmes to work out the male-female balance in terms of representation of, diversity. We have an audit done on that, but I would absolutely echo the point that it is socio-economic diversity, class background, that is the nut that we've still got to crack. I think there's still work to be done on all of those fronts, but I think that is the one. Access to news, and I know this is one of the areas that John Schofield Trust puts so much, valuable emphasis on. But access to news and working in journalism from people from a range of different backgrounds is absolutely key to getting better newsrooms, I think.
I completely agree. I think, I agree with both Kathy and Julie. Colour was the easier one to kind of pick up and say, there's not enough diversity, but class and socioeconomic background and diversity of thought is what's so needed. I noticed one of the questions I was just looking was something along the lines of someone from a non-journalist background successfully entering the field. Would an outsider's perspective be seen as an advantage and disadvantage? One of the things I think that has improved is that newsrooms are becoming more open to the fact that we're all different and we don't have to fit into this mold of what does a newsreader look like? What does a journalist look like? Where have they gone to university? What have they done? Have they done a postgrad? If you have confidence in the fact that you are unique, obviously, and what you are bringing is a personal experience. And if you tap into that, and this is the advice I often give to young journalists or people who want to be journalists. Kathy, Julie, and I, we're all 40 and above. We have no idea, even whether their children are of a younger age as well. We still have no idea what it's like to be 20-something today. And you are bringing that, and you are bringing your upbringing, you are bringing your background, and you are offering that perspective. And never underestimate that is what you're going to bring and diversify in a newsroom, because there is a layer of this Oxbridge, top 5 red brick unis, and a certain social group that they're all very comfortable together, and they need prodding, and walls need literally kicking down. And you can do that, but just by saying, but no one's talking about this. You all think that we're talking about this. No one's talking about that. We all think this is boring. And actually, this is the bigger problem. Speak up and know that you are bringing something different that we have no idea about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. It's absolutely fascinating to get all your thoughts on what is such an important issue in our newsrooms, both in terms of visibility, but also in terms of telling the stories in the best possible way. It's best to have the broadest range of opinions and thoughts. I'm aware you're all very busy, so just one final question. And this, I'm not sure. Oh, this comes from Noah. He says, who would you still like to interview? Is there anyone remaining that you would like to get your claws into, or just like to have a chat with?
Vladimir Putin.
I've got to have a sit down with Trump.
He's yesterday's man. Oh, he might be tomorrow's man.
Never know.
Who would I like to go? I mean, I think just just two of the key names swiftly pinched there by my lovely colleagues on this. But Her Majesty the Queen. I think it's
yes.
There are three key players there.
Never going to happen, Julie. It's never going to happen.
No.
But if she does it with anyone, she'll do it with you.
I'm keeping the naughty question.
Well, I'm sure everyone hopes that all of those interview wish lists will come off. I just want to say a massive thank you. It's been a real privilege for me to hear from you as well, and I'm sure everyone who's tuned in, whether they're sort of John Schofield Trust mentees or otherwise, will have been thoroughly engaged and fascinated to hear your thoughts on a broad range of subjects. So thank you ever so much. Actually, just finally, before we go, one very, very last question for Naga. It's from Ian, and he says, who does Naga think will star for Europe in the Ryder Cup? Fan question.
Who do I think will what?
Star for Europe in the Ryder Cup.
Oh, it's the rookie. It's the rookie, isn't it? It's got to be the rookie. I can't remember his name, but it's going to be the rookie, and we're going to win. We're going to retain it. Sorry, my weekend is completely planned around it, so I'm literally living for the weekend.
Brilliant. You heard it here first. Thank you ever so much, ladies, and thank you for everyone who tuned in as well, and thanks for the John Schofield Trust for arranging it.
And thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Martha. You're doing a brilliant job.
Thank you.